Hi all. Season one of Family Cast is coming to an end, so we wanted to actually do a recap of our season one before we actually move to the season two of Family Cast. Right. So we have broken this into three parts. If you look at Family Cast, we had spoken on FinOps, then we had spoken on DevOps, and we had spoken on GenAI. The first of the series are going to be the highlights and recap of some of the GenAI podcasts that we do. And the first one, we are going to start with Shisha Chowdhury's podcast on GenAI. Now, in this, we talked about like how the transformative potential of large language models is happening, right? How the transition from ChatGPT 3.5 to GPT 4.0, what all we could actually achieve in that, right? And how was it sort of revolutionized the whole stuff, including accessibility for people with disabilities. Then Shisha also touched upon how increasing adoption of generative AI is happening across different industries, right? It's not about touching a single industry, but it's actually across investigative journalism to design to even podcast hosting. She was talking about how this whole Gen AI is actually revolutionizing. And finally, she also touched upon what is her wish list in terms of how she wants this transformation to be actually happening and how she is anticipating some of the newer stuff that needs to come so that like it can change the world. So with that, we will start looking into the Shisha Chowdhury's podcast. Do you have any take on like how this landscape you see it evolving kind of stuff?
Satya, I
Where are the
think
gaps? Where are the gaps? How do you see it? Right? How do you see it
I
evolving over a period
I
of time?
I will still answer from my wish list, right?
Hmm?
All these evolutions and new stuff that are coming up on large language models and its capabilities is all good. I'm waiting to see how it is going to change my life. Right. So I want to see some of those, transformative use cases. And I think some of our greatest minds of our times are at it. So I'm really waiting for those transformations to happen. Right. We were talking about decoding the physical world. Right. Can ADA systems not have to see the world with the way it was created for humans, but maybe interpret it a little differently, like think of it as graphs and nodes or whatever. So what how do we codify the world then like that for them, right? So there are these sort of transformative aspects that I'm really seeking. I told you I do want to see the world to become a little more inclusive of people who are having kinds of disabilities. I do want to see one thing for sure I do see, Satya, is that people are becoming more and more multidisciplinary. Somebody who is, let us say, is a journalist is also on top of leveraging generative AI to do the best work, right? To do his best investigative journalism. Somebody who is, let us say, a jewelry designer is going to be using the best design tools to create this. One of my friend is also thinking of having a podcast session just like this, but having the AI ask the questions or even answer the questions. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So uh, but I would still want to see that transformation, Satya, where my life is changing because of the AI that came in. Maybe justice is faster, right? Maybe relief to those that are suffering from pain is faster, right? So I want to see that sort of a transformation, and it's going to be slow, but I think we'll steadily get there.
In the next podcast, we are going to look at Turjay Chaudhary's podcast. He actually brought a lot of things about what he sees. Like he talked about how he sees about 500 plus POCs that are running, and in that, how many are actually maturing to a real product. And some of these things he actually saw was for established companies, let's say a Microsoft or one of these, that where they have a GitHub or they have Office 365, them adopting a Copilot, a lot of people are actually adapting to it because it's like they're already using it. I can get a summary out of it. It becomes much more value proposition that they are willing to adopt versus how a startup which is coming up with a new Gen AI value proposition, how does it actually get adopted, right? His point was like how established players can quickly add a Copilot on top of their platform so that it summarizes and it can do so many things as a Copilot. versus startups trying to build, that there is a challenge. Right? The other part we touched upon is like a lot of companies, a lot of these Gen AI products are now like, let's say, chatbot, summarization within the companies are actually happening. Versus when you start seeing that to an external world, then there is a whole new challenge which has to be solved in terms of how that can be, first of all, launched and adopted outside of their company, right? So, a lot of things that are internal facing are actually becoming more Gen AI driven, versus a lot of things that are external are still being actually work in progress in terms of how it takes to production.
And that's a good segue into the next one, right? Like, how do you see now? You said like 500 POCs are happening, some are being tested, right? How do you see that maturing into the production stuff? Are you already starting to see companies are some of these POCs have already gone live? How do you see that evolving?
See again, a complete, very pertinent question. See, as I told you, right, startups are already kind of doing, right. So most of the startups, if you see, have embedded some sort of even if you take Stack Overflow, so people were saying when ChatGPT will come, Stack Overflow will kind of go away. Or then there are companies like Microsoft, which is not a startup, but they have invested a lot. So I heard again from an unofficial source sometime that it seems that there was a mandate at Microsoft at some time that I think 70% or 60% of the user stories have to be on GenAI or something like that. Okay, I read somewhere, again, it could be a wrong statement, it was just in a blog. But what I'm trying to say is that the way Microsoft has transformed, if you see embedded Copilot into every single thing, I just read a report that Amazon, even though they have a much bigger share, has not been able to make that level of a impact. Or even if you think of Google, who were the torch bearers in this space, quite frankly, do you really think they have kind of, so with Power Platform Copilot, with GitHub Copilot, the way they have captured the space? So uh, GitHub Copilot, for example, EY users, and then there are other companies. So adoption of some of the enterprise tools, and that's what I'm saying, right? Uh, when you are a strategic partner and that strategic vendor is giving AI tools, you will most likely adopt it. So let's say your company is using Salesforce, and tomorrow Salesforce gives a, I don't know, a CRM Copilot or something, then most likely will adopt it. So that adoption comes naturally. So I don't see a lot of, it might just be an addendum in your SOW, nothing else, okay, or a contract. But when you are going to a completely new tool and adopting it, just like, let's say, PPT summarize a tool that is somewhere by a startup, that it's a little bit more challenging to adopt. That is one. And now going to company itself, going to production, difficult. It's not very simple. At least what I have seen is that internal chatbots are getting released and all. But whenever something has an external facing kind of an angle, it's becoming, it has not, I mean, some have gone to production, true, but yeah, there is a lot of hesitancy, and rightly so, and people still don't know, for example, how should I monitor them, what should I do. So that's what I say, right? The 450 or roughly projects that I think Accenture is doing or stuff, I think most of them are POCs, they were saying in that article. So it's like many people are still in that POC stage, as we hope they would. And I don't personally think that just GenAI will bring in a $10 billion PNL tomorrow, but yeah, kind of including it and again gaining efficiencies, right? So for example, what I heard is that GitHub Copilot, there was a survey that the people said in Microsoft, so there was a team in Microsoft who were pushed GitHub Copilot, and they said there was a survey done at the end of using Copilot for 3 months. They said, will you leave Copilot or leave your lunch money? So that's, and I think 90% or 80% said, I will leave my lunch money, but I will not leave. I think Microsoft Copilot, meaning M365 Copilot or GitHub Copilot, I forgot. The Teams Copilot, for example, if you see, it summarizes your stuff. So those things are great. So adoption will be good. And if you can build great products, yeah, people I think will adopt it. But yeah, it's a challenge. People have to still figure it out. And another thing that I've seen is that many people are building the stuff that in future, let's say, for example, a company builds something that reads all your Outlook emails and makes very nice suggestions. Then Microsoft is coming with M365 Copilot, which is just doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is also a problem. The same problem that every single company has with a hyperscaler, right? So for example, when OpenAI released the GPT thing, many startups were just doing that. They were doing normal RAG, and they were in a problem. So having that unique business proposition. So That's why I personally feel products, well established products which already has a value proposition that you already created, let's say an observability platform that you have created which already has a value proposition, you don't have to prove that, then you enhance it into GenAI rather than building a tool just for GenAI. That might be a little bit more challenging.
In the next podcast, we are going to see Namrata Dikshit's podcast. She talked about how GenAI is being used in the world of developer and DevOps ecosystem, and how they are so much ingrained into the IDP world, right? She talked about how some of the boilerplate code are now being actually done through GenAI itself, right? While you can hint it, and let's say Copilot, GitHub Copilot can actually write the code, right? And you can say a service template to how every aspect of it, whether it's a CI or a CD, and in terms of unit testing, how each of these areas are getting evolved through GenAI, and how she also talked about how the productivity is starting to improve at least by 10 to 15% by using these tools. And then even after deployment, there are tools which actually can monitor and use GenAI features to be able to tell the root cause analysis of that. I think it's been established to an extent that in a cloud world, having an IDP and having a continuous integration and deployment makes a lot more sense to spin up an environment and to deploy, right? But let's look at like, what has changed in this in last 1 year or so with the Gen AI coming in, right? I believe a lot more developer productivity. Now you can really look into the developer's code itself can be done faster, do a lot more things, right? So with that, want to understand your perspective. How are you looking at this thing in terms of using Gen AI and DevOps space? And what are some of the early stuff or success that you are seeing in this?
Sure. See, Gen AI, when it came into, everybody started looking at, what are the use cases that we can, implement in terms of business use cases. So how do we, gain benefits in business with the automated content generation or video generation, context generation. And then there came a boom of, identifying that there's a lot of scope available in Gen AI to enhance the entire DevOps process itself. So there are in that entire DevOps process, there are, starting from where developers are doing a lot of repetitive tasks, writing, it could be, some service initialization, or it could be some authentication authorization, that they are doing logging errors, or, writing in code, currently, which, writing in code in their, whichever ID is there. First, it started from there, how we can, automate this part, or sorry, I would say how we can use GenAI in this part. If we can start the writing boilerplate code is already available. So here we had a crack with the GitHub Copilot that was released. So GitHub Copilot with this new set of features, you get code suggestions depending on the content, or depending on the comment that you are giving. It is also able to suggest the piece of code, though there is a review process involved. In all the GenAI processes, there is a review obviously involved. A human intervention is needed, but then it can suggest code. It can provide, you can just write what you intend to do in the code in a natural language way, and it can give you. So essentially that means that now I can convert my Jira user stories into code directly by using these codecs, which is codecs and Git, that is also being used by GitHub Copilot, also known as GitHub Copilot. So you are directly converting your user stories into code. Earlier, user test creation was some part that people have to write it on their own. Now entire user generating user test, unit test, are now being created by GitHub Copilot. Proposing or fixing some bugs in your code, or changing your language of the code from one language to another in a different tech stack. So first is from a coding point of view, these were all the things that developers had to do. And in recent times, especially with GitHub Copilot and Copilot Chat, and Chat now being available in Visual Code, and Visual Code, and Visual Code Plus, and then it is also being available in other IDs in beta version. I feel that's one space that has evolved a lot. And with that, definitely with Copilot, prompt engineering, I would say, has also evolved parallelly, because the better your prompts are to any chatbot, to be it Chat GPT, or be it in Copilot, that has also evolved. And that's you have to be really good in prompt engineering and have better prompts for system also to respond to you better. So that area is one thing that I definitely see, that there is a lot of adoption within all the enterprises with the GitHub Copilot chat features that has that has come in, and people are using and realizing the productivity of at least 10 to 15% is what I could say that I have seen, even in personally in my area as well, and outside in the industry standards also. Secondly is, on the root cause analysis earlier, having a complex system architecture, finding out a root cause analysis, having one DevOps or an SRE engineer to, to find out the root cause and trying to implement best practices. This load of data collection and this load of, was resolving the issues that are also being now automated. So in a way, we are also having now centralized monitoring logging tools, and there are different technologies also available. Datadog is one of them, where they are using lot of GenAI features to do proactive monitoring and resolve the issues before they even encounter in production system. So that's one of the GenAI features that we see post deployment as well. And lastly, between your development, between your production, this pipeline automation challenges that the regularly our developers or the team faces, the any DevOps engineer faces. There are a lot of automation being created in terms of creating feature branch, or you have to merge branches into the main branch. You have to create pull requests, automation coming in, and automation of the test use cases. So test automation is another area where GenAI is penetrating a lot. So I believe in area of DevOps, starting from development, pipeline creation, spinning up infrastructure, and our post deploy and deployment, automation via deployment, and then having Gen AI based monitoring and logging has taken a key part and in streamlining the Gen AI. With the intervention of GenAI in this entire process, we are now able to release software more frequently. We are able to secure our entire pipelines and entire journey more frequently. There is a higher quality available, I would say, more bringing in more efficiency in terms of code, the code secure code that is being delivered, and also the time to market, and our developers get more time to generate more user stories, and and fix more user stories, reducing their development cycles, and also overall bringing our customer satisfaction who are using these applications, who are able to see and realize their business value quickly.
So in the next podcast, we are going to see Sridhar Gade. We did a 3-series podcast with Sridhar Gade. One, we talked about what are some of the production challenges that are there in taking a Gen AI use case into production. Second, we discussed some of the operational challenges. And then, more importantly, Sridhar talked about the governance challenges in terms of what do you have to do for making sure that all the governance aspect of Gen AI are covered. In the first part series, Sridhar actually talked about how GPUs are the new oil, and why we need to make sure that before we scale the Gen AI, we need to make sure adequate capacity of GPUs are available. The next thing is you need to keep continuously monitoring how the model is actually happening. What probably you did at a beta level, is it actually performing in real life, is something that needs to be tested. And more importantly, the cost. For example, there are multiple ways in which you could build your own things on GPUs, as well as you could use a token-based systems on a third-party APIs. But the cost per request has to be measured to see what's the value we are generating. And then he also talked about how it has to be very modular in a way that we could easily actually deploy and maintain it. In the second part series, he talked about when do we have to take a call? Once, let's say, you start taking from beta to real production, how do you actually start saying that is token-based A systems working, or should you move into a GPU-based systems, right? And that's something that's very, very important to know what's the cost of actually serving this model. And finally, he also talks about how engineers need to understand these models, so that how much can I leverage the model itself than starting to actually do some aspects of coding before have you exhausted all things of training, like in terms of fine tuning it, or can you give prompts and then be able to actually engineer it, right? In the last part, he talked about the governance in terms of what all you need to do before you take this model into production.
Got it. And have you also encountered, for example, you brought in tickets, right? Now, different kinds of product might have different kinds of tickets, right?
Yes.
Have you ever noticed that this kind of tickets, probably this model works? Do you have to use an ensemble of models where, hey, if this category, maybe a technology category might have, though it's a ticket for those products, I might have to pick a different model than something else, right? Is that, do you notice something of that sort, or largely the same models are able to handle a typical use case?
So the way that we used, and my personal observation was that if you had, say, 20 different use cases, you could actually categorize them based on what they do. For example, if there are a bunch of use cases to do with responding to a customer in a customer service or ITSM portal, you're talking about text summarization, email generation, article creation, everything to do with the text is one domain. Everything to do with the code, everything to do with, say, a pharmaceutical company. My observation is more like the LLMs are kind of specialized in those domains than individual like an individual use case or the domain itself. So, but that could, I think, happen in the future as we actually get more granular. Then we might want to actually look at a model which are tuned differently for different purposes of the same domain, which is, for example, customer tickets. But at this point, I'm just looking at only at the broad categories of them, since they are called so-called large language models.
Got it. Now, coming into, let's say, what are some of the other operational challenges that you have to do? For example, okay, I want to now scale it across thousands of, like, probably I was running for, let's say, 10 use cases. Now it has to be run for thousands, right? Now,
Yeah.
what are the other things? Because the GPUs are not like, it's limited, right? What are some of the things that you have to think and then make sure that you plan ahead, and the challenges that you come across, so that everybody can avoid that? Okay, how do I plan to scale that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, in one of the my recent LinkedIn articles, I mentioned this, that GPUs are the new oil. So the traditional cloud promise that we all move to cloud is capacity and demand does not apply to AI. At least it doesn't apply yet, which means that including hyperscalers like Microsoft and Google are limited by number of GPUs available by NVIDIA at this point, and in future, whatever they will build personally. So this is something no one foresaw. Until GenAI came in early this year or last year, silicon was a commodity. All you have to do is ask for more and you get it, right? So it's always, yeah. So in GPU's case, it's totally the opposite. It's basically that you'll have to wait for it, and then whoever hoarding literally the more GPUs are the people who can actually come on the market. So looking at this scenario, I could kind of recommend in three different buckets. One is the capacity, second is the cost, third is the performance, right? So in terms of the capacity, I would recommend folks that you forecast in advance, much higher or much far in advance than we do for traditional CPUs. For example, for my company, I would like to look at minimum 12 to 18 months, depending upon where my workloads might go, and be able to block that capacity upfront. So some of the large hyperscalers are actually able to give for upfront payment or any kind of contract, they're able to kind of block your capacity, number of tokens, billions of tokens or GPUs upfront. And then I would recommend that go just block that, because if you don't do that, there could be a scenario where we kind of did a great marketing campaign and put the product out there and told thousands of customers, but then when you start working on it, suddenly you hit the ceiling, and then no one is here to help, and that can happen for sure. That is a inevitability as far as the capacity is concerned. So proactive work will really help. Second one is the cost. So like I said in the previous example, there's a good possibility that cost can go up very exponentially, mainly because if you're using OpenAI or any of the token-based systems, the traffic can actually go up depending upon how the customer is using as well. Once we put it out, in the traditional SaaS product scenario, it is very predictable. So I put out a feature. For example, this feature is creating an article generation. It does exactly what I expect it to do, depending upon what customer inputs. Right. In the case of generative AI, outputs could vary depending upon customers' inputs, and then that is completely not in your control. And that's exactly why we are looking at a modular system where you are continuously monitoring it through your MLOps, and be able to either switch the models, because there could be two models there's a model which is costing you $1, other model could be costing you 10 cents, 10 times difference, but there could be 20% reduction in the quality. I should be able to just switch to the next one if there is need be. And third one is performance. I think we should continue to look at the performance, and performance model drifts can happen. Same model which has been operating great until last week, and I did a small deployment and with the small prompt changes, and then suddenly it starts behaving like so from milliseconds to it went to seconds. So continuously look at performance as well, and see like how we can benchmark and improve on that as well.
One, you have a use case, and then you run a model. I think, what is the time it takes to actually process and come back? Will the user wait for it, and the cost for it? It's a very important metric, because you could build an amazingly accurate stuff, but if it's going to cost you a fortune to actually get it, it's not going to work, right? In real life production, that's where the prototype stops. You can actually do an amazing demo, but it will never go live, right? Versus, I think the right stuff, like as you pointed out, is to actually look at the cost, look at like performance, and to be able to do it, right? In doing that, what are some of the challenges that you have faced? Now you have been doing this and you're taking it to production. Like, what are some of the operating challenges that you have faced, and how did you overcome those things?
Yeah, no, there were many, but I think just to kind of categorize some of them, one is the choosing of the right model and right cloud provider. And so certain things that I've seen, my observation in the industry, plus in the some of the scenarios that I'm currently executing is, once we deployed it in the production, we started realizing is that once the adoption of the customer and the user generated content starts growing, the token usage has exponentially gone up. It went from millions to billions.
No.
Whereas the value to the customer is almost same. Okay, and in this case, when you kind of extrapolate the same 10x growth month on month, this model will suddenly become unviable economically after 6 months.
No.
So this pipeline, then we had to come back and say, hey, if this can happen to one use case, it can happen to any number of use cases. While we would like to detect them early in the game, but some of these things are only detected once you roll out to 1,000 customers or more, or once you hit, let's say, 5 million token size. So then we created another checkpoint in production after beta. You basically, this checkpoint, you again decide a business executive decision, like go or no go. Should we continue in the token model, or should we offload them to an in-house GPU based model, which is a lot more cost effective? So that example that I use is using an Uber is extremely convenient. But then if you have if you are using only once in a week, then it's great. But then if you have to actually use it like in a heavy usage, then it's better that you actually purchase a car and then actually start using it. That probably become a lot more cost effective. So a token based system, API based, is more like an Uber, convenient but expensive. But then GPU based is more like an owning it, but then it'll actually give you a long-term ROI. So that's one nuance. Second one is the know-how from engineering of the AI orientation is not natural. You can take a great engineer, traditional engineer, but then when the model comes in, they are not able to automatically adopt and find out the possibilities of that using that particular model. And then the amount of investment that you are actually working on, for example, to build a use case, I might want to use in a real-time case like 75% using model out of the box functionality, and then I code 25%. But most of the times, engineers are actually tending to code traditional ways because that's how they have been doing it. And then under leveraging the model, and then by not actually completely pulling the value of the model itself or the LLM itself. So this is another area where we are working very closely with Microsoft and AWS to train and kind of orient our engineers to see like, hey, how do you actually see a value and benchmark and get most out of the model itself. So these are the two major ones, and there are other tooling and other issues, but these are the two major ones.